Now, I did bring some folks from Second City. Come on out, guys. Thank you all for coming out here today. We're so pleased to be here. We were just here a couple of weeks ago to talk about Johnny Cash. I think now we're coming here so regularly that the Clinton School students can add a minor in theater to their degree. And you know, we have such good friends here at the Clinton School, and we're so thankful to be a part of the ongoing conversation about what's happening in the arts, what's happening, the close connection between the Clinton School and the Rep is one of the things that we greatly value. And that partnership is important to the Rep, important to our artists, and we hope important to our community as well. So today we're going to talk about Second City, and we're going to talk about improv comedy. And we're going to talk about really, Second City. I think most of us are familiar with Second City because we are familiar with so many of the Second City alumni. And those of you who have been coming to the Rep for a number of years are familiar with Second City because Second City has been a part of the Rep's programming since 1999. And just about on an every other year basis, Second City has been entertaining our audiences and have really become something that all of our audiences look forward to. And it's true that our audiences for Second City tend to skew perhaps a little younger than some of our subscriber audiences do, and we're thrilled about that too. Second City has been around since 1959, and it began in Chicago, founded on the principles of Viola Spolin. Talk about her as we proceed here. Really, I think, gained national attention through the work of Elaine Stritch and Mike Nichols. Not the Mike Nichols who designs at the Rep, but the Mike Nichols who is married to Diane Sawyer, among other things. They really sort of brought attention to the kind of comedy, and at the time, this is groundbreaking comedy. If you think about the kind of comedy that existed in American cultural life in the 1950s, and how we think of comedy today, Second City has been at the forefront of changing our thoughts about what's funny and how we approach what's funny. Think about the influence Saturday Night Live has had on our culture, and think about how many alums of Second City have populated the casts of Saturday Night Live. And I'm sure we can probably all name many of them, Gilda Radner, John Belushi, etc. And think about people like Tina Fey and Stephen Colbert and others who have come out of that. And then the program launched into Canada and gave us a whole new crop of comedians like Martin Short and Andrea Martin and Catherine O'Hara. If you've seen movies like A Mighty Wind, this whole, Waiting for Guffman, one of my own personal nightmare films, then you are familiar with the work that has come out of Second City. 1 million people experience the work of Second City every year. We are honored to have our cast of Second City with us today. And I want to just start, we can start at either end. Just introduce yourselves to our group here and tell us a little bit about your own background and what led you to the Second City team.
My name is Lindsay Haley. I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia, and found myself after college not wanting to go into interior design or computer design. So moved away to pursue an acting career and shocked my mother and father. And then found myself people had mentioned Second City a number of times. I was in North Carolina at the time and decided to pick up and move to Chicago. So started taking classes, and I've been in Chicago now for 7 years.
I'm Nicole Hastings. I'm originally from San Jose, California, which is an hour south of San Francisco. I went to Columbia University in New York and studied American Studies and a concentration in U.S. history, and went back to California and started teaching in a drama program. And part of the curriculum was to teach improvisation to the sixth graders, and I did not have a background in that at all. So I started taking classes in that in San Francisco, and I guess I caught the bug there, learned about Second City, and decided when the time was right to pick up and move to Chicago and pursue this, and that was about 4 years ago.
My name is Barry Height. Like Lindsay, I am from Richmond, Virginia, actually. I discovered improvisation while studying at the University of Virginia, and decided to put off a perfectly good legal career to move to Chicago and study improvisation, much to the delight of my parents. I guess that's, I have the background for it. I have an English degree, yes, and a degree in philosophy. So I think this is pretty much it. Either be a lawyer or be an actor. So, yeah, there we go.
My name is Tim Stoltenberg, and I'm originally from Plymouth, Wisconsin. And I went to school at St. Norbert College in Green Bay. And after school, I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where I toured for a number of years. And down there, I started doing improv. And then I eventually got hooked up with Second City in Atlanta, and then I moved up to Chicago and been touring with Second City for about 2 years.
My name is Chris Witoski, and I was a Polish kid that grew up in Chicago, and I was a bad student, and my parents let me stay up to watch Saturday Night Live. And then when I was 13 years old, my father drove me to Second City, which is in the Old Town neighborhood of Chicago, to see my first show. And when I walked into the doors, there were black and white photos all over the walls. And I looked around, and it was my heroes on the wall. And I didn't realize that that's where they came from. So I saw Bill Murray from Ghostbusters and John Belushi from Animal House. And I couldn't believe that these guys got their start 45 minutes from where I grew up. So I saw the show that night, and it just blew my mind. And the next day, I signed up for classes. They offer classes for kids at Second City. So I started taking classes when I was 13, and I haven't looked back since.
And you know, it's interesting. You get the real gamut here. You get some of our cast came to it from a young age. Others came to improvisation and comedy through much different paths that had nothing to do with being necessarily theater majors in college. Before we get into some of those explorations about improv, talk a little bit about the Second City brand. And you are part of a touring company, but you are not the only touring company. You have a home base in Chicago, but it's not the only home base. Tell us a little bit about Second City as an institution, as an enterprise.
So when Second City started in 1959, it was a bunch of University of Chicago nerds. And they were beatniks, and they started a theater as a counterculture. And so back then, it was this tiny little black box theater atop of a Chinese laundry mat, and they were just kind of holding a mirror up to society and making fun of the things that were going on in politics and in society. And so that was 50 years ago. So now cut to if you walk in the doors at Second City, it's basically a huge company, and they have 3 touring companies that are constantly out on the road doing shows at colleges and performing arts centers. They also have a whole fleet of companies on the Norwegian cruise lines now. We're on 9 different Norwegian cruise line ships doing cruise ship comedy, and some of us, yeah. Tim laughs because Tim and I did 4 months on a cruise ship, which is fun for 3 months, and then the 4th month. And there's also a whole corporate wing where they do corporate training, teaching corporate suits how to do improv and how to incorporate it into their lives. And then there's the main stage where all of our goal is to get on the main stage in Second City, and that we're kind of working our way up the totem pole there. There's kind of one last step in our careers in Chicago. And then from there, people move to LA and become movie stars, hopefully.
And how many of you, I know you mentioned about, how many of you, so you guys have done the cruise ships, and the rest of you have been touring for, I know you mentioned a couple of years.
I've been touring for about 1 year. I think Tim is the longest touring member on this, and that's 2 years. And so some of us, what Chris had mentioned is super true. There's kind of a hierarchy, an unspoken hierarchy that would sort of go boat co is what we call it when you're out on the boats. And then if you're real good at boat co, you might get moved up to tour co, which is what we're doing. And then tour co goes to a resident stage if you excel at all these things. But there's a number of ways to get fielded for this. I know Tim was picked up out of Atlanta. There was a casting session. You could probably speak better to that than I could. But some of us cut our teeth in Chicago and worked for 7 or 8 years before we even got noticed by Second City doing independent shows. So there's an audition process there. But more than that, if you kind of make a name for yourself in Chicago and you catch a buzz, then they come and recruit you. And so I think a couple of us were hired that way as well.
Is there great competition to be where you are today? In other words, is there a great amount of feeder schools or processes? In other words, how tough is it out there?
Well, I believe every 18 months they're required by equity rules to hold an open audition, and normally you get between 400 and 600 people auditioning for maybe 1 or 2 understudy slots, and that's probably being a little charitable.
I think, yeah, this year I believe it was close to 2,000, actually.
2,000 people auditioning? All right, I have old math.
And they hired 1 understudy out of that 2,000 people.
And your job as an understudy is to hang around and wait for them to call you to go in on short notice.
Tim has strep throat. We need you tonight.
Yeah, we need you now. Tim ate some bad sushi, so you need to learn this whole show.
Why are they talking about you, Tim? They're only.
He always eats bad sushi.
He loves it. He's drawn to it. Yeah, and so that's the process. There's 2,000 people apparently auditioning for 1 or 2 slots every 18 months.
That's like, W.C. Fields said that dying is easy, comedy's hard. And it sounds like that's really true. Go ahead,
I
Nicole.
was just going to say, at any given time, there are roughly 3,000 people in Chicago doing comedy and doing what we're doing on some level. There are other schools, the I.O., originally the Improv Olympic. They focus on long-form improvisation for the sake of improvisation. That's the final product. Second City uses improvisation differently. We use it as a tool oftentimes to create the sketches that are ultimately our final product. There's also The Annoyance, which is another great theater in Chicago that is almost more alternative and is a training ground in some ways, or a testing ground for more alternative material, which is vital in such a rich environment. But most of the people who move to Chicago to do comedy are sort of ultimately seeking that Second City branding, and that's sort of the goal.
I think a lot of people come to Second City and think they're going to become famous. So that's why we have a lot of people auditioning, and I think a lot of people realize that it's not as easy as you think. We spent how many years in classes, in training, being up on stage and failing miserably in front of people before you get to a point in your career where you can do it on an average of doing it consistently better each time. It's easy to die on stage, but it's really hard to make 200 people laugh by telling a good, clean joke.
We know how to do it other ways, for sure.
So I think people get a realization in that, and it takes years of experience and years of training before you get to that point.
But Tim, but the reason, and people often ask, why do you stick with this? I mean, it pays crapola, and you.
Hey, well, except when you're in Arkansas.
But what happens is you go on stage, and the first time you get that laugh from 200 people, from something you just said off the top of your head, it's addicting. You get hooked, and all of a sudden, the next thing you know, you're seeking it. And when you're out on the road with a group of people who make each other laugh, it's the best thing in the world.
And let's while we're talking about improv and what these guys do for a living, let's get a definition out there of what improv is. And I know there's not one definition of it is this, but let's talk a little bit about the art form itself. I mean, obviously, we're used to scripted material, and that our comedy comes out of situations based on the demands of a script. That seems to be somewhat antithetical to what you guys do. Maybe not, but talk about your art form. Talk about improv. What is improv?
I think improvisation for our purposes here is, I would call it collaborative, instantaneous creation based off around sometimes one suggestion, sometimes an entire scene idea, like a man meets the woman of his dreams, but he's busy working at a laundromat or something. But that's our definition. Write that down. Put that in the show. laundromat love scene. Other people like to point to some, I guess what you would call the ancestors of it would be like commedia dell'arte. Someone with a theater degree could tell you what that is. I just know it involves masks and Italian. But for our intents and purposes, it's just, I guess, the creation of a scene spontaneously based off of a suggestion together. And sometimes the thing that changes most is like the intent of that scene. Sometimes the scene is itself an end in itself. Other times it's a means of generating material that'll later be scripted out and then honed, refined, and turned into hopefully a stage-worthy piece.
And I think maybe what the viewing audience might not know about improv when watching it is that we're taught through these classes a kind of language to speak with each other, and the fundamental rule or principle behind that is a rule called yes and I think is the reason why improv ends up funny 80% of the time, meaning that we're up there and we're all supposed to say yes to each other no matter what. Whatever idea comes out of one of their mouths on stage, I have to say yes to it. It's this unspoken law. If you say no to it, the momentum of the scene stops and the potential comedy stops. So any situation that you would ordinarily in your real life say no to, if someone came up on the street and was like, hey, I'd like to perform open heart surgery on you right now, you would obviously say no to them. But if you get that proposal on an improv stage, you have to say yes, and you give them the scalpel yourself. You promote this idea. And so I think that's kind of, in learning about this art form, what was the most fascinating to me. And once you kind of hook into that, it's hard to say no to that as like a life philosophy as well. So I know that the art bleeds into my real life all the time now, and I'm just looking to surround myself with people who live by that same sort of philosophy.
Well, improv's a unique art form because it's only been around, 60 years? Spolin started it, compared to Shakespeare, which has been on for hundreds of years. And I think improv is really unique because it's the only art form where you watch the artist do it from the moment of idea to performance to end, happens instantaneously. You don't watch a sculptor sculpt, you don't watch a writer write, you don't watch a painter paint. That takes time, and they go away and they come back. So I think in improv, a huge part of it is the audience. If you guys aren't there, it's just me on stage talking to myself. So you play a huge part in what we do on stage of getting ideas. And I think it's really interesting in theater where a lot of time you just sit and watch, where in improv you actually are a part of our show and a part of what we're doing on stage because we ask you for suggestions and then we keep feeding off you as you make connections, we make connections. And like Lindsay was saying, yes and. You're yes anding us as we're yes anding your ideas, which is really intriguing and fun to be a part of.
And on any given night in Chicago, and now most cities in the country, there's a theater in Chicago, there's 7 theaters where there are people trying this every night and failing miserably and also succeeding with flying colors. And it's really been neat for me to see the growth of this art form. Yeah.
Well, you talk about this concept of yes and, which Tina Fey talks about in her book, Bossy Pants, and I think also relates to probably the corporate connection with Second City's philosophy about, applying the idea of yes and, because in our work lives, in our professional and personal lives, our immediate response is often to be defensive and to say, no, I can't do that. And this philosophy that comes out of improv of yes and is one that I think permeates everything you guys do. And, I'm sorry, Nicole, you're about to say something. You talk.
I just keep trying to cut you off.
No, you talk. Just...
This concept of yes and also promotes a certain degree of trust with all of us as well. Because if I know that anything that I say, and albeit terribly stupid, is going to be agreed on by whoever I say it to, that frees me up so much to and relieves so much pressure. And I think that is huge for the corporate end as well, because if you come into a meeting and you're like, well, I got this idea for how to market this product, and okay, well, we're going to start with that and build on it. That maybe helps the corporate. I haven't done much of that corporate side, but I was just trying to feed up what you were saying before I cut you off.
No. That was fine. You did fine.
The corporate definitely is huge, and the whole idea of yes anding, because so many times in our human lives, we're just waiting for our turn to talk, so we're not really actively listening. And in improv, when we do this corporate work, we talk about active listening, making sure you're really listening to the person, not just waiting for your time. Examples like the scar story. If you put 5 guys in a room and tell one guy to start a story about a scar, each one will tell a story about a scar. And they're really not listening to one another. They just want their turn to talk, and they'll try to top each other's story. So we try to break that down, like, no, really listen to somebody and listen to their idea, and how can you agree with that and add on to that? Because as a group, you'll probably create something better with 3 minds than with 1 mind arguing with one another. So we go into corporations and work with that.
I got hit by a baseball right here, and I got these stitches, and
See, all of it. I was going to say, to add to Tim's idea, I've done a fair amount of corporate trainings, and one of my favorite statistics to impart on audiences is that you only hear 10% of what is actually said to you. The rest of the time you're pre-planning what your response is, and if you can recount any time you've been having a conversation with a girlfriend at a bar and she's telling you a breakup story, from the moment you hear a breakup story, you're in your head going, I've got this awful breakup story that I'm going to tell you now, and you're not listening to anything she's saying. You're just waiting for that pause in her momentum so that you can unload your story onto her. And so I just think that, yes, we talk about yes-anding and being in the moment, being in the present moment. And you can't actually be in the present moment in improv unless you've completely heard everything that's being said to you, because the most important thing that your scene partner is saying could be the last word they say in that sentence. And if you're pre-planning your response, you might miss an integral part of the scene. And it's our idea to become, or our job, to become really good at listening and saying yes to each other.
In the show that audiences see at the Rep, they see different kinds of improv comedy. They see sketch comedy, and then they see suggestions. You take suggestions from the audience. It's a 2-part question. The first is the sketch comedy that we see. Now, I know that some of it is tied to sort of greatest hits, and they are sketches that Second City has been doing for a long time. In that context of those sketches, in your rehearsals, is it do it like they've always done it, and you're guaranteed to get a laugh here, here, and here, or do you guys bring some of your own to those sort of historically famous sketch comedy? And in the improv, when you're taking suggestions from the audience, is there a structure to that we may not see? In other words, are there behind the curtains, I don't want to use the word tricks, but techniques is a better word, that you employ to get you from A to B when an audience says you're a strawberry farmer?
So the show that you will see if you come to the Rep, which please do, by the way, we run through October 23rd, is kind of broken up into 3 things. It's greatest hits, like you said. So that's sketches, the best sketches from the 50-year history of the Second City. And that is really special to us, because when we look down at a script that we're memorizing and it says the name Colbert and then Carell right under it, and we're doing their parts that they wrote in the 90s, that's a really special thing for us, to be doing the scenes that our heroes wrote. Then we do scenes that we wrote. So some of the sketches that you'll see are stuff that we came up with during rehearsal and improvised through and then eventually put onto paper. And then there's the improvisational part, where we get suggestions from the audience and play an improv game or do a long-form improv. So to answer your question about the greatest hits stuff, it's a constant conversation that we're having at Second City. Are we a cover band? Are we just doing it exactly the way they did it? Or are we able to bring ourselves to that piece? And I think it's a balance, because myself, I've gotten in trouble for adding my own jokes to a classic script. and then we have a discussion with the director, and I say, hey, but I'm getting more laughs by adding my own stuff. And they say, yeah, but you're ruining the integrity of the scene that these guys wrote. So it's a constant balance as far as that goes. What do you think, Tim?
No, I agree. I think, it's like playing Hamlet. I mean, it's been done hundreds of times, thousands of times, and the lines never change. But that interpretation of how you present those lines and the character you bring forth to the audience and the connection you make will change between each artist. So when we get these classic scenes, definitely we're doing them as best as we can to the original, but there is that little flavor of Chris Witowski that's in there that no one else can do, that I think adds to it, that makes it unique, so that even though you've seen the scene 3 times by 3 different artists, it should be different a little bit each time, because we're adding our own personal flavor and charisma to those roles. At least I hope we are.
And to speak to, as far as the improv part of that goes as well, we talked about yes and as being kind of, you're speaking of behind the curtain, like what do we know? And with improv, we really are, for the most part, besides the language that we're taught in these classes, which there's some guidelines to good improvisation, but it's never pre-planned. There's never really anything other, than that going on, with the exception of some fundamentals like saying yes to each other. We know that if you bring a strong relationship to the scene, you care about the person you're on stage with, that chances are it'll be more successful than not, that it's a good idea to add, we have like a who, what, and a where. If in the first 10 seconds of the scene you can get out who you are to each other, where you are, and what is going on, what's the beef of the scene, then that's better to start the scene out with. But other than that, like we've got these guidelines, but as you all know, I mean, you're up on stage, you get a suggestion, sometimes that stuff goes right out the window, the fundamentals and the rules, it's gone, So we're pretty much flying blind for sure in the improv sections of our show.
I think the other thing with the improv section is when you spend 18 hours in a van with people driving to Sheboygan, you learn how each other's like tendencies and habits and stuff, and these people become very close to you. So another great aspect of the improv is using that opportunity to like, I know Tim has this weakness or this thing he really likes doing, so I'm going to do this, make this choice right here. And the audience will have no idea I'm doing it just to like poke at Tim, to like have fun with him. But like that's what you gain from being an ensemble.
Like we know that Barry has an amazing Bill Clinton impression.
Oh, it's so good. You guys missed out on the greatest sketch
You missed out
ever.
on the greatest blackout in
It did
history that is
not-
not getting into the
Did
show.
not
But
make the show, unfortunately.
we should probably do
Should we
it
do
right
it?
now.
We
should probably.
So
Okay.
just to put this into context, a blackout is just a one-line or two-line joke that happens in our show. So it'll be lights up, a very quick premise, joke, and then the lights go out, and it's called a blackout.
Okay, so what you're about to see is a blackout. So imagine that the lights are just going to come up on stage, and you're in a kitchen. Okay, you're in a kitchen at a kitchen table.
What is this? Well, you call this food? Do you call this food? What is this? Some of this vegan stuff? Huh? What is this? What is this? You call this what? Some kind of vegan stir fry? What is this? What is this? Tofu? There's no flavor to this. It has no flavor at all. I work hard all day. I come home and you cook me this. What do you have to say for yourself?
I did not have Szechuan seasoning. Wow. I'm so glad.
It's ahead of its time.
See?
It's ahead of its time.
So you guys see how Szechuan was
This is what we
so
come up
close
with
to
when we-
sexual relations? Like you're
Right.
you're holding
Right.
on to Szechuan for
Right.
as long as
Yep.
you can.
Right.
I think they got it.
18 hours.
I think they
Wonderful,
got it.
just
18
wonderful.
hours in a van together. This is the kind of
That
stuff that
is
happens.
what tickles your fancy.
I think there's a reality show there somewhere. So
Worth
here's a philosophical question. Are you born funny, or did you become funny because you hung out with other funny people?
I would say the latter. I would say that I learned to be funny from my dad and my aunts and uncles and grandfather, and so I would say the latter. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think you're right. I think a lot of what we do, like the ability to elicit laughter from people, comes from your ability to sort of find moments that, I don't know, people will identify with and have a humorous reaction. I'm so boring when I talk about comedy. It's like the worst thing in the world. But yeah, like you just become a better witness to like what is funny in your life. So I think you can learn it. I think anyone can learn it because so much of what we do is just about being honest. Like some of the most hilarious scripts that are in the archives, if I showed them to you, you'd be like, what's funny about this? But then you have the patter and the back and forth, and it's just hilarious because those people were good observers of human behavior. Boring again. Here we go. Let's move on.
I think it is learned in a big way. I I doubt that I'm alone when I say that in my family, I play the role of the person who's making the jokes in tense situations. And I learned that also from a way older half-brother. So we sort of both shared that role. And then just sort of sprinkling comedy and figuring out how to use that throughout my life. Another part of it, though, is being up on stage. So having some sort of presence and what are you giggling about? Yeah, so there is an element of theatricality or acting that's involved in this as well. But as far as actually being funny, I think that's learned, and I think anyone can learn it.
I would definitely say, in my family, which I think is interesting, I played the serious one, and my sister is the funny one. And so I definitely think that it's something that can be learned, because I was surrounded by the most colorful, amazing people my whole life, and that I might be a palette for that, that I might be able to embody that and personify that and bring that to an audience. But I can clearly tell you that I am surrounded by people who are naturally funnier than I am every day. So it's kind of an honor to, we just went and did a show in Abingdon, Virginia, and I got to perform for the first time in front of my college roommates, and they came to the show, and they're the most hilarious women I've ever met in my entire life. And I was reminded of that at that dinner. I mean, they were making me laugh until my sides were splitting, and but maybe I can do that on stage, I mean, it's an honor. It's such a cool job.
I think the other big thing this sort of all touches on, this idea that like you can learn this, and that so many of our stories about how we came to be improvisers is based around our experiences with our family and friends. I think it touches on the other big principle behind like improvising and being able to work collaboratively together, which is listening. Like, you're just surrounded by people and you listen to them and you pick up things, and like you sort of apply them to yourself, or you just collect these things. So I think listening is the other big touchstone of what we do. So yeah, and that goes hand in hand with, you can learn to do this if you're listening to each other.
I know this. I can teach anybody improv, but I can't teach you how to be funny. Because I'll meet somebody that I've never met before, and they have nothing to do with comedy, and I think they're hysterical. And there's people in Chicago who've been here for 25 years, and they're totally unfunny. So I don't know where it is. I know you can learn the art and the skill of comedy, but I think there's something inside of you that has to do with timing, or knowing when to say it or when not to say it, when to pull focus, when not to pull focus, that I don't know how to teach somebody how to do correct timing. I could run you through 100 exercises, and I'd still be like, it's not funny. I don't know how, but I know through our experiences of taking all these classes and being around comedians and funny people, that you do sort of osmosis, absorb this idea of what is funny to you. And as you get older, I think improv changes from just doing these to, I'm expressing myself as an artist in my own unique way that I express my own ideas in comedy and creating with these wonderful people. So I still don't know.
Tim,
I will say,
what's the secret to telling a good joke? Timing.
But you'd be amazed how many people will ruin that joke when they try to tell it. Barry did it right.
I will say that, like in Tim's case here, you can be born funny looking. So.
Chris learned that joke from somebody.
Do you guys travel all over the country? Do different audiences in different parts of the country find different things funny?
Oh
Yes.
my gosh, yes.
Give us some examples of
Well,
what you mean.
poor Nicole here. We were in the Bible Belt not too long ago in Abingdon, Virginia.
You are in the Bible Belt.
And we're still there. We're still there. Yes. We were in a different part of the belt. I would say a stronger part of the belt. The belt buckle part of the belt.
Buckle. Yeah.
So we were there, and there's some atheist jokes. We're edgy. There's a line in our show that says, "I hate God," and this is an archive scene that we have no choice. Like we are doing this. Our director has put it in the show. And so Nicole has a song, and she can speak better to this than I can. Nicole has a song where she refers to atheism, and then in the scene right after that, she has a line where she says, "I hate God," and it was crickets. I mean, it's supposed to be one of the biggest laughs in the scene, and it just fell, and we were like, whoa, boy, there's a whole minute of just silence, and I think one person walked out, you know, so we have those experiences pretty often.
We did a show in deep Mississippi. I forget what the town was, and we do a scene where we poke a little fun at the tea party, and we got booed. Yeah, we got booed. So it's definitely, and so we do all these shows on the road, and we get treated like rock stars, and we play these giant theaters, and we get these amazing receptions, and then we'll go back to Chicago and do a show, and the people in Chicago are used to seeing these shows. So we'll do a show that gets rave reviews somewhere, you know, in the middle of the country, and we go back to Chicago, and it's crickets because they're like, nope, we're not impressed. We've seen it.
Yeah, I should say the night after we played Abingdon, when I sang this song, and there's these 3 hits against atheism. I did not write the song, but there's these 3 hits about atheism at the end of this song, and it was just, the air was sucked out of the room. The next night we came back to Chicago and played for the Obama campaign folks who were in from all over the country, and they freaked out and loved it. And I was like, refresh, okay.
Godless people.
I think. I think the most important thing is when we do these shows, no matter where, is that we instill a response. If they hate you or if they love you, you've done something inside of them to make them have their own critical idea or opinion. So I'd rather have somebody walk out and say, that was terrible, I totally disagree with you, or I love it, than just sit there and be like, I'm indifferent. Because then that's not theater. Theater's not doing its job. We're here to perform for you, to send some ideas or opinions to you, and bottom line, you will come to your own conclusions about if you agree or disagree, if it's funny or not funny. And that's what we should be doing. So I hope we get a response from the audience, definitely.
Let's open up for questions and see what you all would like to ask our team from Second City. Sir, and there's a mic, there's some mics wandering around the room, and it's important that we start with them. So over there.
Now we're on. Actually, 2 questions. Do you have to be smart to be funny? That's one. The other is your goal to get a laugh, or is it to get from point A to point B and create something with integrity, as you said, and something that's shiny?
What was the second half? To get a laugh or
To get from point A to B and create something with integrity and something that shinies, something that holds together.
Do you have to be smart to be funny?
In Tim's case, no, you don't.
I don't know. I think you need to be observant. Maybe I'm not particularly smart, and I do all right.
That's a lie. That's a blatant lie.
I do all right. I don't know. No, I don't know. I think you just have to. I think it goes back to the listening thing. I can't speak to the smart to be funny thing because I don't know. Tim is real dumb, and he's so funny, though. He is so funny. But you give that guy something with a zipper or buttons on it, and he freaks out. He's like, what? You tell Tim about the metric system, he loses his mind. He's like, that's witchcraft. And it's downhill from there. So.
I was going to say there's a number of different kinds of funny. So if you're going for a political satire, I would say absolutely you have to be extremely intelligent to keep up with the best of the best and to stay on the cutting edge of that. You know, current events, reading the newspaper every day. Like I know people that's a avid practice, you know. But my specialty is certainly not that. I would say I'm more of an emotional comedian. So bringing vulnerability to emotional moments and human moments or something. But I think that's based on the style of comedy that you're attempting to go for. But a certain amount of smarts doesn't hurt. And then to answer the second question, which refreshed me on that because I had an answer for it.
Are you trying to get laughs?
Are you trying to get laughs? I think that's also dependent on the comedian. Because we've all heard stories about, and nobody in this group is this way, but steamrollers are people who are just like out there gunning to get laughs. But we are taught a more ensemble-based, you know, the art form in general is geared towards, like you said, creating something poignant first before eliciting those laughs. So whenever the opportunity is there to knock it out of the park, none of us are going to say no to it for sure. But I think for me personally, the goal would be to create something more artistic. And have the laugh be a secondary thing to come out of that vulnerability or that acting.
I know this. Anybody can tell a dirty joke, but to tell a clean joke and make it funny is not easy. So I think comedy is smart, but don't get me wrong, because a well-placed fart is pretty funny.
But I think that's a big difference between what we do and what stand-up comedians do. Because stand-up comedians are trying to get a laugh. It's set up punchline, set up punchline, set up punchline. And what we're trying to do is build a relationship and find the truth in that. And then hopefully you'll laugh as a result of, you know, seeing a husband and wife argue over the heating bill or something like that.
Write that
Write
down.
that down.
Good one, Chris. Yes.
Heating bill, husband, wife.
Got it.
We've got two questions right there. Yes, and then we'll come over to you, sir.
Is this on? Is it on?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
had actually two questions. One of them is sort of implicit in what you said is Chicago. I was there with my children. They have an incredible theater culture. And so, you know, does that inspire you? You moved to Chicago and there's all this stuff going on. And the other thing is, I teach philosophy, so I noticed that I know Steve Martin studied philosophy. And so I was wondering, when you said that it's only a 60-year-old art form, of course, philosophers don't go for that. So I was just wondering if you also study Aristophanes and you just study the history and you think that you're really part of a tradition, you just didn't start something 60 years ago, you know, it's like branching from a tree or something. Do you see it more like that? I mean, sometimes I worry about Americans. They do think they were born yesterday. So just answer that.
Just answer that. Just answer that.
What was all right, so, okay, one, I definitely did not move to Chicago for the weather. So yes, it was definitely the theater scene. Yeah, was that that was the first part, right? Yeah. There are like some great things about Chicago, the weather, the food, but no, weather's the bad thing. The food and the theater are great. The weather's rotten. 6 months out of the year? Yeah. 9. As to the other thing, like, sure, like, yes, branch on a tree. Perfect metaphor. Awesome. Well done. Yeah, Commedia dell'arte. Yeah, don't know what it is. It's Italian. It involves masks. Comedy itself, Aristophanes. I saw Lysistrata once. Yep, I enjoyed it. Yeah, branch of a tree. Perfect metaphor. Philosophy.
I was just going to say the theater scene and improvisation scenes are actually oddly not very connected. It's difficult to pursue a career in both. It's difficult to try to do straight theater, and they do have amazing theater there. Goodman, Steppenwolf. But it's rare that people cross over very successfully. And then secondly, I think I am conscious of the fact that it wasn't really just a 60-year-old tradition. You know, there was a huge movement for it in the settlement house movement. That's sort of where it sprang up in Chicago and then was turned into games and then really turned into something that was more of a performance art here in the United States in about 60 years ago or so. But I mean, if we think about like the roots of a lot of American art forms, jazz, bluegrass, these things we could also find ties back to in Africa and all of these things. But so we're speaking to when it really turned into the version that it is now. And yeah, it's a branch on a tree.
Other questions? Yes. Oh, I told this gentleman he'd be next, then I'll come over here.
Yes, I also grew up in Richmond, Virginia, a long, long, long time ago. Okay. And back in the late 50s, when Saturday Night Live first started, I was going to the University of Richmond, but downtown we had a college called RPI, Richmond Professional Institute. You remember that? Okay.
My mom was Miss RPI in the
Oh,
60s. She was.
Well, RPI was the artsy side of the Richmond colleges, okay, at that time. And they had a very, very good improv group formed back in the late 50s, copied right after Saturday Night Live. And I was involved in the Richmond little theater as far as working on the stage, on the stages. And I used to go down there on Friday and Saturday nights, just, you know, because we were poor college students, you couldn't afford to do a whole lot, and it was free with 10-cent beers, so you went there. So we had a great time. But I'm saying to a lot of the young people here in Little Rock, as well as other cities around the state and the country, you've got lots of small improvised comedy setups if you look for them. Because you have to look for them. It's a wonderful outlet for everybody, whether you're going into political satire or you're going into straight comedy or whatever. But it's a wonderful release, and you can make so many people laugh, because you really can. Thank you.
This gentleman over here had a question. Yes, you.
I'm not the
Or not.
gentleman, but I'm a gentle lady, I
That's
suppose.
right.
Okay. My question is, y'all said thousands of people are trying out for spots, but you didn't mention how many are trying out in the corporate training world. Is that a big thing, or is that below boat code?
Corporate training. When we refer to corporate training, we're speaking of people like ourselves going out to teach corporate America the philosophy or the art form of improvisation and long form improvisation, and how that's applicable to what they're doing in their business. So corporate training, it's essentially a level that we have esteemed ourselves to or beyond, where you've gained some credibility in this art form and you're then sort of certified or deemed certified by the community to go out and teach that to corporate America. So I know a number of us have gone and done corporate trainings, but that's just us going and hosting workshops and things like that to kind of brainstorm with them and help them with whatever they're doing.
And then what will happen occasionally is you'll inspire someone in that corporate world to quit their job and try and do this, which is an awful idea. But that happens from time to time.
It does.
And there's plenty of opportunities for classes in Chicago. And so we recommend that people take improv classes just to, you know, learn how to be better at speaking with people and just in day-to-day life kind of stuff.
Well, the goal of the corporate workshops must be different than the goal of taking classes, in that the objective is not to make corporate executives funnier, but rather to get them to interact more successfully. What are the goals of the corporate wing?
I've taught at Columbia University and Duke Business and Duke Law and UCLA and some corporate stuff. And there you're using it like yes and. Specifically, it normally goes out to like, it boils down to using yes and as a tool for like collaborative creation or idea generation, or fostering an environment where people feel free to bring forward ideas. Because the big statistic you hear is that people don't quit jobs, they quit managers, you know, and that's the #1 reason people leave positions. So those are normally like the principles we try to indoctrinate people when we teach those workshops.
Another principle too, and Nicole touched on this earlier talking about marketing. There's a philosophy called brainstorming versus editing. Which, imagine you're working with a marketing campaign and you're in a collaborative student project, and how much energy was expended trying to come up with what you guys were going to work on versus just saying yes to the idea and moving forward and getting more specific about that idea. And so in a lot of the corporate workshops, we'll immediately encourage them to say yes to the first idea proposed and to get specific and to work and build on that thing together, versus I know that for me in college when I was working with groups, probably 80% of our energy was spent arguing over what we were actually going to hone in on as that project. And so we kind of trim the fat there and get them to get specific about that idea quicker, getting them to that point quicker.
Okay, good. This gentleman here has had his hand up for a while.
Hi, I'm Matt Lyon. I'm a first-year Clinton student. We just really appreciate y'all coming. It's a treat for sure. One of my favorite quotes is by Oscar Wilde. It says, "If you're going to make someone laugh, you'd better tell them the truth, or else they'll kill you." And I'm curious, like, you know, with some of the comedians like you know, Bill Hicks or Louis C.K. or people that are really kind of trying to put a mirror on society, what you think like the roles of comedians are, and also like what kind of comedians you aspire to be, or who you're looking up to right now.
It's all about truth. That's what it is. It's all about trying to find truth in and what we do. It's a lot of social satire and political satire. So we're trying to, look at what's happening in politics and hold a mirror up to that, a la The Daily Show or The Colbert Report. And then with societal satire, we're looking at just how we act as these weird human beings that we are, and trying to bring truth to that. So when you talk about stand-up comedians, like I think right now what's going on in our country, I've been watching a lot of YouTube clips of like George Carlin and stuff talking about, I mean, he talked about this whole Occupy Wall Street thing 10 years ago in one of his stand-up specials. And so those are the stand-up comedians that I find myself going to, as people like George Carlin, Louis C.K., who really try and hold up a mirror to society. Yeah. Next question, I guess?
No.
Did I?
Yeah, we could do that. Personal heroes, I think, was part of that as well. And we were just having this discussion the other night. I think part one, obviously, comedians are supposed to hold a mirror up to society. And I think that's kind of always been their job, to make people question things. But I find myself also going back to the older style comedian. Not that Carol Burnett is super old, but referencing things like that, and to kind of find, I don't know if it got muddled for a little while there, but I feel like there was a more wholesome Americana approach to comedy in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and that's something that's very interesting to me and to try to bring back right now, as opposed to just the dirty, lowbrow sort of stuff going on. So as far as being a woman in comedy, my heroes, Lucille Ball, Carol Burnett, all sorts of, Gilda Radner, just to bring truth and lightheartedness and love versus all of this cynicism. And I think people need to laugh and smile right now. Do they need to be reminded of everything that's going on that's bad right now? I don't know.
And we could go on because there's so many questions and we are out of time. So we're going to have to wrap up. These guys are in town through a week from Sunday. Tonight and next Friday, our local improv troupe, Improv Little Rock, will be joining them in the improv section of their skits. And I want to thank you guys and thank all of them for joining us. Thank you very much.
Good job, guys. Thank you all for being here. And if you guys are crossword puzzle or Sudoku competitors, tomorrow we're hosting the Arkansas Crossword Puzzle and Sudoku Championships right here at 9 o'clock. Come on. You can enter. As an out-of-state entry. Thank you all for coming. Have a good weekend.